I would love to scan the brains of Salar Sikandar, Anakin Skywalker, and Tony Stark, especially to compare their neural patterns before and after their profound character transformation.
Hi, hello. How are you? Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hope you guys are doing okay and taking care of yourselves. So, let's get into it.
Last few months, I have been locked in a mental wrestling match with Paul B. Armstrong's book called How Literature Plays with the Brain, a book that is equal parts brilliant and exhausting. I mean, imagine a professor who forgot to take his ADHD medication giving jaw dropping and fascinating lectures on reading. Now replace the professor with this book, which explores the intersection of neuroscience and literary studies, revealing how reading engages the brain and whatnot. But here's the thing, this book is dense, like published scientific paper dense. The writer crams in a ton of studies, but instead of unpacking them one by one, he layers them on top of each other, jumping from one to the next without always connecting the dots. Halfway through a chapter, you will suddenly get a research result thrown at you with zero introduction, and you're left thinking, wait, when did we start talking about this? Yet, despite its chaotic delivery, this book explored how literature physically alters our brain. It answers bizarre and fascinating questions. I mean, the science is too good to ignore. So let me reconstruct this mental IKEA furniture into something actually usable for you. What drew me into this book, despite how challenging it was to read, was that I thought reading was an ordinary, everyday skill, hardly worth a second thought because I have always seen it that way. For me, reading was natural, always a refuge, an inward looking habit that felt both personal and quiet. I used to have joked that I live through fiction because reality does not offer me much. But my god, this book, or more like the neuroscientist in this book, insists reading is nothing short of a cerebral miracle. Unlike vision or speech, which come pre installed in our biological frame wire, reading is not an innate human function. It is instead a triumph of neuroplasticity, which is a fancy term for brain's uncanny ability to adapt its existing structure for new cultural tasks, or in simpler terms, it is the neurological equivalent of opening a PDF in Notepad, and against all odds, the gibberish tells a story. Armstrong in his book mentions the cognitive neuroscientist Stanley Dehaene, who coined the term neuronal recycling to describe how the brain repurposes evolutionarily older neural circuits to support modern tasks like reading. And through his fMRI scan, he found a recycled region, that is the visual word from area, or VWFA in short, situated in the left occipitotemporal cortex, sandwiched between areas specialized in object and face recognition. Think of it as the brain's glorified letterbox, one that didn't evolve to read but now does. Dine's fMRI studies show that this area activates exclusively only in literate individual and is universally located across culture, suggesting a shared neural solution to a cultural invention. In short, our brain didn't evolve to read, but they have ingeniously repurposed existing neural circuits, and now we can read. Now, this neurological sleight of hand is added by a curious geometry of writing system. Evolutionary neurobiologist Mark Chengzi analyzed 96 alphabet and symbols, including Chinese characters and other ancient scripts, and found that the shapes used in writing bear a striking resemblance to those found in natural environments. Letters like T or L mimic the junctions and contours we commonly see in tree branches, corners, and other visual scenes. Chengzi argues that these visual forms were culturally selected because they resonated with the brain's innate visual biases. In other words, we didn't evolve to read, but we did evolve to recognize visual patterns. So when cultures invented writing, they designed symbols our brain were already prepared to interpret. Together, Dehaene and Chengzi finding underscore the brain's defining trait, plasticity, and the ability to bend, not break, under cultural pressure. Reading illustrates this flexibility in full form, bridging biology and cultures, neurons repurposing themselves, and culture designed around neural affordance. It's a rare neurological interplay. Yet plasticity isn't merely structural, it's behavioral too. Neuroscientist Eleanor McQuarrie's study on London taxi driver, for example, revealed that drivers who mastered the knowledge memorization of over 25,000 streets in London developed a significantly enlarged posterior hippocampi, the region associated with spatial memory. This wasn't a genetic fluke. Their brain changed in response to
intense cognitive training.
Similarly, Armstrong also mentioned Ellen Bleistock's research on bilingualism, which showed that multilingual individuals develop denser gray matter in language processing region, and Fred Cage's work at the Salk University, which revealed that adults' brain can generate new neurons, particularly in the hippocampus, but only when exposed to novelty and challenge. Meaning, reading, especially, isn't just a pleasant diversion, it's a full brain workout, like a gym membership for the mind. Reading stretches and strengthens your mental faculties as long as you show up and read. Also, on a side note, after reading about these experiments, I wish someone would scan the brains of Hafiz Quran, who are these people who have memorized the entire Quran and have insane recall.
But just as neurons grow with use, they weaken through neglect. Oliver Pascali's study at the University of Sheffield found that infants who weren't exposed to monkey faces lost their ability to recognize them by 9 months, a phenomenon known as perceptual narrowing, a process where the brain refines itself by pruning away unused neural pathways. In essence, the brain trims the axis to specialize more efficiently. So basically, neglected neural circuits, much like unused muscles, quietly atrophy over time. But reading is not just an exercise in decoding symbols, it's a simulation of minds. Italian neuroscientist Giacomo Rizzolatti discovered mirror neurons, which are cells that fire not only when we act, but when we observe others performing the same actions. This neural mimicry explained why reading about someone crying can make us tear up, or why we wince when a character is slapped. It's not being melodramatic, it's neurobiology. Armstrong also mentioned Antonio Damasio's as if body loop, which furthers this idea that our brains simulate emotions as if we are experiencing them ourselves. And Paul Zek's work on oxytocin, the hormone which is responsible for trust and empathy, shows that emotionally resonant stories raises oxytocin levels, forging a bond between reader and character. And that's why we get sad for fictional deaths as if we have lost an actual friend. Now Armstrong talked about how neuroscience also reveals how language can hijack sensory systems. The Boba-Kiki effect, first studied by Wolfgang Kohler in 1920s, showed that people across cultures consistently match the sound boba with rounded shapes and kiki with jagged one. This effect, once considered trivial, later turned out to reflect cross-modal brain activation, which is basically your senses gossiping behind your back. This synesthetic tendency is amplified when reading fiction. When a novel says the desert sun burned his throat, your sensory cortex light up as if you're experiencing thirst. So when you're reading a book, your brain isn't merely absorbing information, it is living the story. Of course, no discussion of reading and the brain would be complete without a cameo from Jennifer Aniston. Neuroscientist Rodrigo Kwan discovered neurons in the middle temporal lobe that respond only to highly specific concepts. One such neuron fired exclusively when its owner saw pictures, heard the name, or even saw cartoon sketches of Aniston. These concept cells shows that our brain cross-reference reading material with stored memories, visual representations, and emotional tags. It's a bit like Google search, but more neurotic. All these experiments on neuronal recycling, perceptual narrowing, mirror neurons, concept cell converge on one idea. Reading is how the brain constructs meaning from chaos. It fuses sight, sound, memory, language, emotion, and cognition into a single act. In reading, the brain performs an elegant conjuring trick, transforming static symbols into immersive experience. Reading is not passive, it's not natural, but it is essential. It sharpens memory, deepens empathy, expands vocabulary, and bolsters emotional intelligence. It's no accident that reading correlates with better academic outcomes, more social awareness, and increased psychological resilience. The brain, the most peculiar organ, both stable and plastic, consistent and chaotic, finds in reading a perfect match for its contradictions. I'm ending this video here as a reminder for anyone who, like me, once thought that reading is just a silent hobby. It's not. It's so much more than escapism. It's a neurological performance. It's a full body simulation. It's a philosophical mirror. And yes, occasionally an excuse to cry over a fictional character as if they were your best friends. Excellence isn't effortless, but subscribing to this channel is. So stay inspired and subscribe to my channel.